Chapter 19. The sun was at Hein's back, the birds were chirping, the breeze was mild and warm as it traced over the small gaps in the armor, the turning of the wheel rolling over the long dirt road was a steady, constant noise, much like the occasional snorting of the horse Nfaya drove. Rather than walking beside the cart, he and the adventurers that had guarded the young man, rode seated and chatted amiably. Lupus Regina, true to form, was a lively and engaging conversationalist, but equally true to form, she used that charm to draw out words they might have otherwise held back. Though far from brilliant, her brutal wit had its own way of making people see things the way she wanted them to. Heinz was content to just enjoy the day and continue to call it a work trip. It had already lasted far longer than he estimated, but it was only a matter of time now before it would end. Before he could let his mind travel far down that road though, he saw a distant cloud ahead, and leaned forward toward Nfaya. "Do you see that?" he asked. The young man squinted. Is that a dust cloud?" "It is, and the wind is low right now, so what does that leave?" Heinz made the question sharp, and even through the shaggy mop of hair, he saw the face of his client turn pale. "Stop the wagon," Peter ordered when he heard what Heinz said. Nfaya obeyed, pulling on the reins and raising his hand so that the others would see and do the same. None of the adventurers needed orders to know what to do next. Heinz vaulted from the wagon, a majestic leap carried him beyond the front of the horse, his legs bent on landing and he quickly straightened up. His great swords came out, and before his first step, the other adventurers took their places in a wedge formation in front of the lead wagon. Peter took up position at Heinz's left, while Lupus Regina took the right, and the team spread out from there with Nina at the rear. Soldiers or bandits, but there isn't a big difference between the two sometimes. The way Peter shifted his shield and gripped his sword a little tighter revealed that the uncertainty was likely worse than either alone. I see. Will soldiers bother adventurers?" Heinz asked. "Inside a city? No. And adventurers of high rank? Never. But you're a copper rank pair and none of us are above iron, so the guild might take a guard's word for us starting trouble outside of a city," Peter replied, and Heinz's estimation of the Riesti's kingdom's worth dropped yet another notch. "Wait. Those aren't. They can't be?" "No way," Peter whispered as the figures drew closer. "What is it?" Heinz asked. "Those aren't soldiers. Don't you know who that is?" Peter's voice began to reach a higher pitch with every word. "No, should I?" he asked with a furrowed brow beneath his helmet. "The red cloak, the mask. Lucrut, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Peter exclaimed and whirled to face the ranger. "Yes, unless you know another team like that, that's Blue Rose." Lucrut's excitement was palpable, and the entire team relaxed. "Blue Rose? Right, I've heard of them." Heinz began to sheathe his swords, and Lupus Regina pouted, but put away her mace. "I thought they were a group of 5 women, but it looks like a dozen people there." "It's a suppression force. Someone must have seen the skeletal dragons and an emergency dispatch brought them in to deal with it." "Hey, won't this be a surprise?" Peter asked rhetorically and began to wave his hand and shout. "Hey. Hello. Everything is fine," Peter shouted and waved, and a wave of relief went up in the form of countless sighs up and down the row of wagons. "We better go deal with them." Merman, Lupu, would you come with me?" Peter asked. His face was flushed red, but the vibe Heinz got was hero worship rather than just anxiety alone. "You were the two that took care of the problem, all we did was handle the scrubs." "Fine," Heinz answered, and the trio stepped away from the stopped carts, approaching the dozen adventurers on horseback, and much to his surprise, as they slowed down, from among the group, there was a familiar face. One much better equipped than the last time he'd seen him. "Gazif Stranov," Heinz murmured under his breath. When they were 10 yards from the wagons, the trio stopped, and a radiant blonde woman in expensive blue and white clothing rode up, flanked by the broad-shouldered dark-skinned Gazif. It was the head warrior who spoke first. "Did I hear someone say everything was fine?" There was some disbelief in his voice, but the horse was reined in. He traded a look with the radiant, fair-skinned blonde woman. She clearly shared the doubt. "I heard that there were 2 skeletal dragons in the area. Did we hear wrong?" Relief and anger warred on his face, and was mirrored by the tight-lipped blonde. "No, you heard right, I killed them," Heinz explained. The 2 on horseback stared at him with open doubt, their eyes focused on his copper plate. "You? A copper plate? Killed not just one but two skeletal dragons. The blonde woman replied. It's polite to introduce yourself before you basically accuse my partner of lying, lady. Lupus Regina snapped and crossed her arms in front of her chest. The blonde snapped her back all the straighter and turned her eyes over to the copper-plated cleric. Lake Hughes of Blue arose. And you are? Moman. Ines replied, and my partner, Lupu. Our team name is Axel. And yes, I did. One skeletal dragon is difficult for a single adamantite adventurer team. Your copper plates. You really expect me to? She stopped when Lupu pointed to the wagons. Go back there and look. We were just bringing the bones back for proof. They're all there, along with witnesses, witness statements, and so on. Including our client, Nfoyabear. Lupus Regina's face was clearly quite smug. My partner took care of the dragons, and the wise king of the forest. I took care of some crazy bitch named Clementine. The name echoed back beyond the pair and all eyes turned to the redhead. You killed her? Gazif's brows went up. Sure, assuming that's her body back there all wrapped up in pieces. Lupu answered him, but Gazif could barely comprehend it. He stared at the plate that hung down in front of her neck, and she crossed her arms. If you're going to check out a woman's chest, be more discreet about it. Pervert head warrior, Lupu said, crossing her arms in front of her chest and letting out a snort of derision. He did a double take and could not help but laugh for a moment before the gravity of her claim came back to him. Ah, how, exactly? I tore her apart until the blood stopped flowing. People who lose both their arms tend to die for some reason. Lupu shrugged, go figure, right? Gazif traded a look with Lake Hughes. We need to see this. To be sure. You understand? Of course. Ines replied nonchalantly and the trio stepped aside. The head warrior raised a hand and gestured forward, and the rest of the adventurers on horseback followed. Impossible. Unbelievable. Are they copper plates, seriously? The words came from the various adventurers who reached in and pulled out chunks of bone, and looked for any evidence of falsehood. The peasants driving the wagons were quick to confirm everything that was asked of them. Yes, the Dark Warrior of Axel killed the dragons. Yes, the dragons were summoned by a magic caster. Yes, they had the bodies. Gazif took up the head of Clementine, wrapped in a preserving cloth. She was unmistakable. If the facial expression was any clue, the fearsome warrior had died in absolute terror and pain. The wounds on her body also supported what the copper-plated Lupu had said. The woman's limbs had been literally ripped off. A sword left clean cuts, a mace like the sword Lupu wore, that crushed. But these were tearing marks, bits of skin dangled where it had been ripped away. Not far from that, was the head of the wise king of the forest, which drew comments, stares, and disbelieving strokes of their hands over its soft fur. He set the body parts down and turned to look over to the masked magic caster. He looked down into her mask, and she threw it up to him. How does a copper plate do this? Gazif asked with a small whisper. By being stronger than that when they started. The little magic caster said when the milky-eyed head of Clementine was put back into the wagon. Evil Eye, wasn't it? Gazif asked. Yes. She answered and cursed her diminutive stature. She grabbed the top of the wagon's side and pulled herself up to look into the pile of bones. And that, she pointed to the red-robed corpse, is a Zoranan member who has had a bounty on him for a long time. You recognize him? Gazif asked rhetorically when she let go and dropped back down to the ground. I do. I never met him personally, but I've seen drawings of his face. There are not many people who have long heads like that one, and one ugly face, even for an old man. His name is Kojit Dale something or other. He is, or was, a high-placed Zoranan member. He broke from the main branch a few years ago and disappeared along with a number of disciples. Somehow, he ended up here. Evil Eye replied and shook her head. He came to a bad end, no real surprise to be had with that. Most people like him, do. Gazif grunted, a bad end, or in charge. I wonder what he was doing out here, but if he is what you say, and who you say, it's no wonder he fell in with Clementine. I definitely know who she is. I fought her once, but couldn't kill her. I always considered her a loose end. I'd say it's tied up now. That's for sure. Evil Eye looked up to the pile of bones. I couldn't agree more. Gazif's armor clinked a little when he reached up and tapped the side of his helmet. The armor was a rust-colored red with a brass-colored outline around the various components. On his back was a long blue crystal sword. Clad in the treasures of the kingdom, Evil Eye couldn't help but doubt even Lake Hughes could defeat him as he was now. And yet he was still clearly, obviously impressed. The guild will have to reevaluate them both before you think to take them to the capital for anything. You know that, right? Evil Eye asked, uncertain if he really did. Good man, but dense about guild politics. She rolled her eyes behind the mask and ignored the chattering of peasants and adventurers as the story was told and retold. Is that so? Why? Gazif asked her with genuine confusion. Because they're copper plates. If people think copper plates can do this, it will degrade the value of all the other high ranks. Next thing you know, they'll try hiring young and inexperienced people off the books, and then Evil Eye stopped speaking. He understood. That was clear. The brief haunted, distant look was turned toward the other young adventurers, iron plates, in the prime of life, vigorous, and vulnerable both at once. How many young warriors did he see die by taking on things they weren't ready for yet? I guess it isn't just adventurers who suffer that end. Come on, she finally said, if we take too long, we'll be just rude. I'll get Lake Hughes. It's obvious that they're telling the truth now. Evil Eye replied, and went to her sister while Gazif turned away and walked over to the tall dark-armored warrior. I don't like that one. Lake Hughes grumbled and crossed her arms in front of her chest. The glare was toward the red-haired cleric. You don't have to like her, but Gazif confirmed it. That was Clementine, Evil Eye said in a low whisper. I swear, I love her, but she's so stubborn. The magic caster rolled her eyes looking up at the woman she considered a sister and tugged on the enchanted wrist-length cloth. I know what that means. You don't have to tell me. They have to be adamantite or nearly. How is this even possible? We should have heard about power like that before now. Lake Hughes kept an eye toward the redhead with the mace that was chatting with the big, beefy knack of the Oracle Team Rainbow, but her question demanded an answer from Evil Eye. I can only guess. They're foreigners. Not many have dark skin like that, so maybe they have reputations from somewhere else, somewhere farther south? Evil Eye suggested. The important thing though, is that we have them reassessed as soon as possible. Adamantite teams are always needed. If he really took down 2 skeletal dragons by himself, it would be crazy to make him grind through iron, silver, and gold ranks as if he hadn't done adamantite feats already. I still don't like her. Lake Hughes shot a glance at the brown-skinned beauty, and gave distasteful snort. Was I that childish at that age? Evil Eye wondered with a roll of her eyes so large that she was grateful for the mask that hid them. Whatever, let's go. Evil Eye replied and gave an insistent little tug on Lake Hughes's arm. The suppression team warmed up to the beautiful cleric with exceptional speed, though the dark warrior was more quiet and sparse with his words, but that was often the way of heroes. He sat in the wagon while the newly arrived senior adventurers rode on either side. Idle chatter was the rule, but an Evil Eye couldn't help herself when she rode beside the dark-armored warrior. How do you do it? She asked. Some special item? Power? Ines pointed to the great swords on his back. I kept hitting them with these, then he pointed to the many carts loaded down with bones, until I turned them into that. How much did the village pay you to protect them? Evil Eye asked. They're giving you a bonus, I hope. They paid nothing. I was escorting him. Ines jerked his thumb toward Nfaya. I don't normally like escort quests, but I guess they can be okay. So, why didn't you two just grab him and run? All you had to do was protect your client, right? Evil Eye stared up at him, even mounted on a tall horse. She had to turn her face up to meet the dark hero, and she immediately felt him stiffen at the question. Then who would protect the village? Ines asked. She felt his stare through the helmet, and against such an answer, she felt her heart, which had been stilled for over 200 years, skip a beat. You're serious, aren't you? Evil Eye looked at him cockeyed, like he was some alien thing she'd never seen before. Of course. After I killed the wise king, I gave my word I would protect the village, he said to her, and she bowed her head. I apologize for the rude question. I shouldn't have assumed you were the sort to run away. But most would have. Evil Eye apologized. My name is Moman. And Axel is not most. He answered, and Evil Eye quietly promised herself one thing. I'd see him in an adamantite plate the day we return, even if I have to get a ladder to climb up and put mine around his neck. That's the kind of adventurer this world needs. A hero. A true hero. Though her words were not spoken, the sentiment was shared up and down the line as in spare moments on the trip. Momon's noble words were spread among the peasants, pulling the proof of Team Axel's victory, with many a driver privately resolving that they would spread Momon's name throughout the whole of Erantal. Chapter 20. When they were within hours of Erantal, a member of Rainbow rode ahead to alert the guards of the pending arrival of something all but unthinkable. It was because of this alert, and the natural gossip of those who heard the word, that the gate was opened all the way and crowds got out of the way in advance, ready to see what had never been seen before. Lupus Regina was true to form not 20 minutes before coming in sight of the gate. Momon killed 2 skeletal dragons. All you did was show up late and congratulate him. He should ride in like the hero he is. Lupus Regina's sharp yellow eyes and her fixed stare on the 2 members of Rainbow, along with the truth that she was right, were effective tools. And so, 2 of the Orichalcum team members rode in the cart, lending their horse to Team Axel, and to add to that, Lupu had a further suggestion, one she gave with a twisted smile that seemed to savor its own warped nature. So it was that the head of the wise king was mounted atop the tip of one of Ainz's great swords and held aloft for all to see, as if it were mounted on a pike. The people of this world are impressed by strange things. At the end of the day, it was just a big hamster. But listen to that. Ainz was glad the helmet hid the rolling eyes over their commentary. He actually killed that thing? Such power in those eyes, even dead, I'm scared to look it in the face. And look at those bones. So many. Zombies, and is that a part of the head? The praise and awe came from numberless voices when they wound their way through the streets, all the way to the Adventurers Guild, where a group of adventurers was already standing outside, anticipating something they weren't sure even the suppression force could handle. There were 24 adventurers outside on the grounds when the caravan began to line up. The peasants hopped down with a single spry motion as if they were a military unit and began to unload the bones and lay out the dead for counting. However, it was the swords of darkness that withdrew the heads and bodies of Clementine and Cogit as proof of their demise in front of the guild leadership and guild members who watched in ever-growing disbelief. The clatter of bones was punctuated by the murmuring of armored men and women, many of whom reflexively clutched at their armaments, swords, spears, hammers, and so on as the bones were laid out end to end in row after row. Our contract is complete, Momon, Nfur said with a sad bowing of the head. I have to go see about grandmother. If her body was left at home, it might have been reported by now and taken by the watch. That means I'll have to arrange for her funeral and everything else. But as soon as I'm done I'll move back to Carney and set up there. If you'd like to wait in the city for a few days, I'll put you up in the best hotel. The best, isn't that costly? Ainz asked, lowering his sword to let Lupus Regina retrieve the head and watched while she approached, all smiles, toward the guild leaders and held it over her own head for all to see. Nfur chuckled and shook his head. Skeletal dragon bones aren't very useful to me, but they do have their uses in some other fields. They're tainted with magic, so a lot of casters will pay a great deal for even one fragment. This though? He inclined his head toward the rows that were still forming. This will end up being sold all over Easties and perhaps as far as Baharuth or who knows where else. The story will spread with the fragments, and in months if not weeks, Axel and its leader Momon will be on the lips of adventurers everywhere. Shock went through Ainz so much so that he froze. All he could manage was a simple, I see. That is good. Such humility out of such a powerful man, almost anyone else would be boasting, bragging and talking themselves up. But he really doesn't need to, does he? His power, his character, it all just speaks for itself. Nfur thought with a wave of envy through his body that he despised, and resolved to overcome. 2 skeletal dragons. Do you see that? Lupus Regina grinned and pointed over and over, at the bones. Plus the wise king of the forest, plus Clementine, plus Dale the long-headed twit. She stamped her foot, dropped the head of the wise king on the ground and set her hands on her hips. You name me any adventurer who did that much is less than adamantite. She may be pushy, but she has got a point. Evil Eye looked up to Pluton Sack and imitated Lupu's posture, though she tapped her foot on the grass instead. If they were already Orichalcum, you wouldn't hesitate to promote them to adamantite for this one, and we both know it, Pluton. A broad-faced, hook-nosed man with brown hair and narrow eyes was quick to interject. Well, that may be so. But he's only had just one adventure. Yes, it is an impressive one, but still, one must pay their dues. Sorry, who are you exactly? Evil Eye demanded, turning her attention to the adventurer who stood with only a moderate amount of enchanted equipment. Igvaj, of Kralgra, a Mithril-ranked team. The largish man snapped his mouth shut, feeling the stare behind the mask. Then shut up. If you had your way, one of the 13 heroes would have to linger below their due rank because they hadn't been there long enough. One adventure with enough events to fill 100 adventures is worth more than 100 adventures where nothing happens at all. Evil Eye scolded the man, who sucked in his teeth, clenched his jaw, and went silent. Sweat sprang to Pluton's brow. His eyes darted from the other adventurers to the adamantite blue rose and over to the increasing body of evidence showing that the little magic caster was right. And then to the uncommonly dangerous cleric and her companion. This isn't like being caught between a rock and a hard place, this is like being just surrounded by rocks and hard places. I can't offend Blue Rose, but I also can't offend every other adventurer here with a rapid promotion. No matter how impressive. His eyes continued to dart around until he felt a gentle hand fall on his shoulder. He swung his head over to find the radiant pale face of Lake Hughes looking at him. Hey, now. Those are all good points. Why don't we split the difference here? Split the difference? How exactly? Lupu inquired of the adamantite-ranked swordswoman. There's. Lake Hughes glanced quickly over her shoulder and leaned in. That matter. She lowered a hand and discreetly pointed her forefinger toward Nfia. Her words became a whisper that the young man couldn't have heard even if he weren't in conversation with the Dark Hero. His grandmother was brutally murdered to find him. The fact that Clementine was with Khajiit at the village is no coincidence. Clementine definitely killed the old woman, but why? Why is her grandson so important? It's his skill. You know something, don't you? Lupus Regina guessed, her predator senses clawing at her mind. Her nose itched when she smelled the anxiety on the pretty adventurer. I have it on good authority that Clementine did not leave for nothing. She took an item with her, something she needed Nfia to use. There isn't much like that would also be of interest to someone like Khajiit or Zuranan in general. Lake Hughes kept her eyes steady on Pluton. The middle-aged man had gone a bit too fat over the years, but the steel resolve of an adventurer in his youth and long experience was not gone yet. He stared back and narrowed his eyes as he ran through the list of items that might include. You're sure? Pluton inquired. Lake Hughes crossed her arms. Nothing in this world is a given. But I can't think of any item more likely than the Crown of Wisdom. So, what's this crown thing? Lupu asked. You're talking around me, and I don't like it. The battlemaid clenched her jaw, but far from being dismissive, the blonde who had earlier almost made Lupus Regina want to claw her face off, spoke sincerely. An item of the old gods, used on certain people, it turns them into living items that can use powerful, 7th-tier magic. Almost nobody can use it, but since Nfia can use anything without any requirements, Lake Hughes explained and then stopped short when Lupu face-palmed. Of course, yes, that makes sense, Lupu said as if she understood the obvious. 7th tier is impressive to you people? See, this is why I think of you as just toys. The derisive thought was covered by her gesture, and the other adventurers gave slow, sage nods. So I'm guessing you want me and Moment to go and sort this out, finish the job, get back the crown thingy and prove we're worth the cost of materials for new plates? That about it? Lupu winked at them and stuck out her tongue. Yes. Well, that would do, but... An observer, we need someone beyond doubt, beyond question to go and who will come back to confirm you are beyond question, adamantite level. Pluton's sweating resumed. Igvaj promptly spoke up. I'll go. You'll just slow us down, why are you even here? Shoo, shoo little manlet. Lupu quipped and held her arm out toward him with her palm down, and waved her fingers back and forth. He immediately turned red with fury. I'm a Mithril-ranked adventurer, you snot-nosed noob. I'll not be talked down to by some other noob's little. He reached out to snatch her hand, intending to put some pressure on her fingers and remind her of his seniority. What happened next was not entirely clear to anyone but Evil Eye, and even through the magic caster's eyes, she wasn't sure of what she saw. Igvaj's hands moved with preposterous slowness as far as the magic caster was concerned, but by comparison, Lupu's hand moved faster than the sound of speed itself. She had his wrist gripped in her slender palms, and squeezed. The smiling face was gone as if it were only ever a mask, and raw sadism was naked and plain. "Little what? Little man? Little what?" Lupo demanded. He was down on his knees, gasping, clawing at her grip and finding all his strength was beyond worthless. He managed finally to squeak out a prideless know-nothing. Only then did Lupo release her hold, and the smiling face was back. She stuck out her tongue at him, then said in a cheery voice, "Oh good, I thought we had a little misunderstanding there. I'm glad we cleared that up. Now, as Mr. Einsack was saying here, we need an observer, and since Igvaj here is," she coughed and gave a mocking look to the man struggling to stand on shaking legs and rubbing his pained wrist, no longer interested in observing, "how about Evil Eye here?" "Me?" Evil Eye looked up to the cleric. "Her?" Lake Hughes added. She glanced over to the rest of Blue Rose. They seemed more interested in getting stories from the peasants, and she knew them well enough to know they wouldn't care for an assignment they'd see as babysitting. "Sure, you trust her, right? And she's the strongest of your party, isn't she?" Lupo asked. "If she says we're adamantite, we are, and that's that. Nobody will argue against Blue Rose." "No. No, I suppose nobody would do that," Pluton acknowledged, "but this is still a quest. You're officially going to retrieve a possible great treasure. Eliminate any hostiles along the way. We don't have an immediate reward for this, but I can personally promise that the king will grant a reward of comparable value later," Gazif said as he approached the little group. "You'll just have to trust my word. Is that good enough for Axel?" Lupo pointed to Ines. "That would be for Moment to decide, but I think he'll be okay with that." She flashed a winning smile at the royal head warrior, and he wasted not another moment in going to speak with the onyx-clad hero. "That settles that. Now, how about something to eat, eh? Something meaty?" Lupo gave Igvaj a look as he backed away, and licked her lips. He did not linger any further. "Dangerous, she is extremely dangerous, and she's the cleric." Evil Eye contemplated. The rest of the group were giving her once-overs as well. The response to the perceived insult to Mr. Moman had not gone over well at all, and to so easily crush a mithril-ranked warrior to his knees was unthinkable even for someone a rank higher who was also a warrior. For a cleric to do that? What did that make Lupo? It was a question for which the magic caster had no easy answer. However, the charming brown-skinned beauty with the fiery red hair in long braids was almost impossible not to like as far as Evil Eye was concerned, and it kept her thoughts on a singularly enjoyable track that she wasn't about to move away from. Besides, if Moman likes her, and he's the kind of man he is, there must be a lot to her. And Igvaj was out of line. What would I do if someone insulted Lake Hughes that way? Looking out for a teammate is just to be expected. Yes, everything will be fine, and who knows? It might even be fun, and I'll get a chance to be near Moman again, and that I think I'll like very, very much. Chapter 21. Once the full tally of bones and bodies were laid out, there was one more thing to do before departure. Say goodbye. The armor of Clementine, which she had bedecked with the plates of the many adventurers she'd slain, was held out by Moman. All present adventurers, even Igvaj, fell silent as one by one the lightly armored and heavily armored alike came forward to look for the names of missing comrades. Indari. Wow, I wondered what happened to him. Hard to believe, someone said, and taking out a sharp dagger, they cut away the binding that held the gold-colored plate in place. After going through the rest, the young woman stepped away, knowing no more of the names. A beefy warrior approached, thickly muscled, and carrying a large maul on his shoulder. He slammed the head of it hard into the ground. He was bald-headed and had sharp blue eyes that ran over the many tags. Stern fellow, Ines thought, until water filled the blue eyes when he found a name he knew. Gretchen. His trembling hand touched the silver plate. So it's true. He bawled like an infant when he found the name on the breast of Clementine's armor. His thick, sausage-like fingers pawed at the plate until he got a nail behind it, and yanked it away with such force that the leather strips simply snapped. So it went, one by one, until only a smattering of little plates remained with none to mourn them. It was after the last of the adventurers had come and gone, that Pluton Einsack approached and held shaking hands up. I will take the rest. The names on here must belong to other guilds. I'll put out word to the guild masters there and send them back for proper honors. That's good. Ines replied. The man's grief hit him like a hammer, and Ines nodded respectfully at the offer. That is the way it's done. Every man and woman who registers knows there's a possibility they might die out there. Some go into too much danger, too soon, and that's it. Some just have bad luck, a bad day and it's the last. And some. He blinked back watery pools and paused when his voice choked up. Some we just don't know what happens, until somebody finds their plate. Sometimes in a cave, sometimes in a monster's belly, and sometimes, like now, on the armor of a monster disguised as a human. Einzak spat at the ground, and Ainz gently, reverentially laid the armor into Einzak's hands. The remaining plates rattled on the handoff, then Einzak turned to face those present. A moment of silence for the dead, may they rest easy in the afterlife, avenged, and free of pain. The plump guildmaster said, and quiet befell the area that was so great you could have heard a pin drop. Heads bowed for the span of several breaths, and the called-for moment passed and was done. When it was, the guild members took it on themselves to disperse and return to the interior, while Pluton Einzak turned back to the Dark Hero. "Mr. Moman," he said while looking up at the Dark Hero's helmet-covered face, "you've done a service that, in my view, would justify immediate promotion to Adamantite. However," he folded the armor up and tucked it under one arm, then scratched his head in thought before going on, "some folks would be unhappy by such a rapid rise. The feeling may be that it cheapens the rank if it is achieved so quickly." Ainz crossed his arms in front of his chest. "If I think about it like a job. Right, it's like when somebody just joins the company and immediately gets a big promotion. It doesn't matter what they did, the others see them as not having paid their dues yet. Still, I did something big out there." It rankled, but he kept most of that from getting out of his mouth. "I shouldn't need to prove my strength again and again. But I understand. You're about to offer something, aren't you?" Ainz guessed, and the plump face of the tense guildmaster relaxed. "Yes, if an adamantite adventurer accompanies you on this task and attests to your strength, nobody will argue against a promotion. Evil Eye of Blue Rose has volunteered." He gestured to where the short mage stood chatting with Lupus Regina. She saw and waved her hand, hopping up and down with almost childlike enthusiasm. "Just finish this, get our endorsement, and that will be that." "I see, explain what you need then," Ainz said and gave a quick, hesitant wave to the masked woman. "She seems to like me. It would be good to have a friendship with someone outside of Nazarick, even if they're not especially strong compared to its children." Pluton Einzak went on to explain everything he knew, which proved to be far too little. He was just wrapping up when Evil Eye approached with Lupus Regina in tow. The masked mage stuck her hand out toward him and he grasped it firmly, taking care not to squeeze too hard. "So it looks like I'll be joining you as an observer," Evil Eye said in a childlike voice. "She sounds very young. Is it the mask? Is that a side effect of it, or an enchantment?" Ainz was very curious what lay behind the accessory. "Just try not to get in the way, eh, short stuff?" Lupu said and winked down at the mage who briefly took a step back, offended, until she saw the tongue sticking out and realized she was being playfully taunted. "Right. I'll try not to get in your way," Evil Eye replied with a chuckle as if that was too absurd to even contemplate. "So, where do we go first?" the little mage asked the pair, and for that, Ainz was grateful to have a quick answer in the form of a question. He looked down at the woman who was barely more than waist-height to himself and asked, "Where are there likely to be a vast number of bodies?" "This is Rantel, a major assembly point for Riastai's soldiers during our wars against the Baharuth Empire. You can't throw a rock without hitting a grave somewhere," Evil Eye answered with a disappointed sigh. "So, this really is all there is to him, jump to the obvious and no further, and he made such a strong first impression." Ainz nodded in answer. "Yes, I see, I see." He muttered and thought back to his days as a guildmaster. It was a warm, happy memory, raiding tombs to build up his own necromantic skills, and when he thought about that, it made sense. Older graveyards are full, by definition, that's why new ones get opened up, but they're also little used and so rarely visited. Perfect place to hide if you're a necromancer. Ainz thought and dropped his hand down to put on Evil Eye's shoulder. Her heart jump-started almost immediately despite being quite dead, and then it did it again when he spoke to her. "That isn't quite what I mean, I'm sorry, I thought the depth of my question wouldn't be lost on an adamantite adventurer," Ainz replied, with Lupa chuckling when she moved to his right side. "What I mean is, where would I find the oldest, deepest, and most heavily used graveyards, some place that is almost never visited any longer?" Ainz asked the question more thoroughly, and to him, it seemed she was pausing to think. Stupid, you should have known a great man like him would think deeply and quickly about a subject. You don't get to be that powerful without learning a lot along the way. Evil Eye criticized herself for the foolish moment of doubt and answered just before the silence could become awkward. The oldest graves are south of the city, the great families are at the center. There are a great many old catacombs that run underground all over the area. Nobody ever goes there unless a member of one of the city's great families dies. Even then, they now use mausoleums above ground. I see, so a deep system of catacombs that nobody ever visits and are swelling with all the bodies a necromancer could ever wish for, is that right? Ainz asked her, and to that, Evil Eye could only incline her head and be grateful that she could no longer sweat nervously. Then let's get going, Ainz answered, and every heavy armored step he took, made the dead heart of the little vampire woman come to life again. Reaching the outlying graveyard took time on foot, but there was little reason to hurry. Nightfall didn't concern the pair as far as Evil Eye could tell. When the shadows swept the land and dead tree limbs took on the look of monsters in the dark that would tower over great heroes, the pair she observed moved under and past them unafraid. The way in was unlocked and unguarded, only a low iron fence that had rusted and fallen into disrepair in many places served to separate the living and the dead. The brown trail was of hard, packed earth that crumbled beneath their steps, and the grave markers went from clean white or granite, to old, grey, and moss-covered in many places. More than a few were cracked, and many more than that were broken. Names forgotten because all who knew them passed away, were ruined forever when stones toppled over the earth that covered forgotten faces. Names were worn away by wind and rain, a testament to the age of the area they now found themselves within. Finally, Evil Eye watched as Moman called a halt by placing a hand on his teammate's shoulder. Envy shot through the little vampire mage at the familiar touch, while she also acknowledged with a certain cocky pride in her own advanced recognition that, he is a true professional, he doesn't speak without need in a potentially dangerous area. It feels good to have physical contact with someone again. The undead body had its uses, but the same senses were different than this, even through armor. Ainz thought with a certain sense of comfort at the feel of the shoulder under his armored hand. A flawless sense of caution. Lupus Regina thought with pride in her lord, he wants me to check and signal him covertly, that's why he says nothing even though he knows I love it when he speaks. Lord Ainz is so cool. Lupus Regina wanted to howl with excitement, but she focused on the matter at hand. She sniffed the air, it was heavy with the stench of death, and some living things. She turned behind her to face the little magic caster. While not entirely certain what to make of her yet, she acknowledged privately that Evil Eye recognized her master's greatness instantly. That put her at least somewhat better than a mere worm that had yet to see his greatness first. Lupus Regina tapped her row nose 3 times, and visibly sniffed the air to ensure her actions were understood. The thick odor of death and decay was punctuated by the odors of some living things, small animals for the most part, possums, coyotes, foxes, and others that might try to take shelter among the scattering of trees and graves and broken old tombs. She pointed off in a slightly different direction and raised a fist so that both could see her. She opened and closed all 5 fingers 4 times. She then pointed down. 20 underground. She must have a talent for scenting things out. What's that they call it? Hunter's nose or something. Evil Eye pulled her faded memory to the fore and watched as Lupo took the lead. Lupo's simple traveling gear seemed to offer no protection on the surface, but it was difficult not to notice that it somehow seemed impossibly clean as well. Enchanted, probably against damage too. Evil Eye realized, and her estimation of the copper plate team axle went up another notch. This is just like the game. The lifelong gamer in him came out in force, and Ainz pointed Lupus Regina off in one direction, while he went down another. Evil Eye herself hung back and watched as the pair split, and she began to follow down the center. She smelled the blood when it hit the air, but heard no scream. Fly, Evil Eye cast the spell and ascended into the air. Her blood-red eyes widened like saucers when she saw the superhuman speed with which both Moman and Lupo ate up ground. He was tall enough that his long strides carried him faster than the undead they encountered could respond. Old, degraded blood of the sort that had lingered too long in a corpse for even a vampire to desire, flowed into the dust and grass. Moman's sword never missed a neck and severed them clean off, sending corpses toppling with quiet, final thuds. Lupo was little different. Her mace simply broke heads, but if Moman was a sprinter, Lupu was an acrobat, leaping from place to place before any of the watching undead could respond or call out to the masters that summoned them as guards. She's like a wolf chasing prey. I've never seen such a deadly cleric. Most of the time they're frail at best. No wonder she brought Igvaj to his knees so easily. Within minutes only, the undead were dead again, and without a skeleton or zombie letting out a cry. Evil Eye descended upon the pair as they approached a large columned gate of white stone. Heavy bronze doors barred the way within, and with the undead put back to the ground, there were no guards to keep them out. Nice work. Evil Eye acknowledged when she stepped close to the pair. Course, Moman is the best, Lupu gushed, and when the towering dark hero reached out, took the large handle with one hand, and pulled a door meant to be pulled by three or more, opening it by himself. She was not inclined to disagree. Within, torches flickered and glowed, casting the shadows of the dancing flames in endlessly shifting patterns over white floors, leading far, far beyond easy vision, and giving away the recent, even current occupation of the House of the Dead, by the living. Without a trace of fear that would have set many an adventurer to hesitating, Ein said simply, as a hero might, "Let's finish this," and placed one foot forward into the parade of shadows. That was when she watched the impossible. There are times to go in stealthily, to hunt and stalk and kill your prey so that they die never knowing that their death was coming, so that they die wondering what killed them. But not for nothing, the hero charging forward is considered the greatest ideal. Evil Eye thought and watched as the pair immediately began their charge. Moman kicked a door in with such force that its iron hinges snapped and the entire piece flew inward, crashing into someone out of Evil Eye's sight. She immediately felt his life force die. Head crushed. That's a hero's might. Charging a magic caster was a dangerous thing to do, and yet he did it. Rushing into the room, his great sword swung in broad arcs just out of view until she caught up with him. Behind her mask, the vampire mage's eyes widened. The sword swung through a room that was fundamentally too small for them to do so. Yet they did, and why was more impressive than the two bodies that lay cut in half on the floor. His swords cut through the stone and cut through the solid rock more easily than an oar split the surface tension of water. Scattered rocks along the wall testified to the raw power of the towering dark hero. Evil Eye left Moman behind and followed the sound of the laughing Lupu. Her ears told the story of what was happening, and yet she could barely believe it. Lupu smacked the door open when she found it around the corner. The back of her hand cracked the door in half so simply that it toppled with ease. Hi. She wiggled her fingers at the three magic casters that stood around a captive stretched out on a rack. They wore dark blue robes and carried short wands. Their faces were shrouded, but she could smell their fear and shock, not to mention see it when they whirled around to face her. On the rack, a pitiful specimen of a human lay strapped down. His arms and legs pulled so far that his bones were obviously no longer connected to one another. His head fell limply to the side, which likely took all the gaunt, emaciated man's strength to manage, in order to look at the one who caught his tormentor's eyes. "I run." He tried to whimper out, and as if his words were a trigger, the magic casters who tormented him began to cast their spells. Charm person. Sleep. Confusion. Oh, they want to capture me, how quaint. Lupus Regina giggled and rushed forward. Her left and right hands caught the throats of two magic casters before they could utter another spell, closed her fingers tight, and pulled. Her nails dug into soft flesh and the acrid stench of urine hit her nose at the same moment. Fear intensified in the dark eyes beneath the hoods. The pulling fingers ripped into the throats and tore the flesh away. However, the third man between the two was struck by her body during her charge, and he flew backward over the table. He rolled over the prisoner and tumbled end over end on the stone floor until he came to a stop against the wall, striking his head and dazing him, but he did not die. Lupu had a cruel smile etched on her face when she released the two once held fast in her grip. They fell as if they were one person, living long enough to feel the agony as their knees hit the stone floor, and long enough to feel the pain when their faces hit. Saka rubbed the back of his head. Hitting the wall stunned him, his vision blurred. His comrades began their slow fall to the floor with spraying red droplets, now signifying only that his present minutes were full of fear. What happened? What happened with Clementine? What happened with Master Khajiit? Who is this? An adventurer? Stunned or not, he could wonder such things by the time she hopped over their victim and approached him. Her hips rolled in a sensual walk, the long red braids that hung down her back were swaying in time with her hips, and red dripped from brown fingers that hung loose and open like claws. You had a bad day now, huh? Real bad day, but don't worry. The redhead was saying to him, I'll make it all better. Saka tried to understand the nonsensical thing the radiant, exotic woman was saying, but it made no sense. You're my master's test, you know, and I aim to make sure he passes. Hesitation is weakness, and he never hesitates. He is bold, brave and loyal, and he will have everything. You are just a stepping stone. Now be a good stepping stone, and stay still so he can step on you, and move a little further forward. The woman said and cocked her head to give a sweet, beautiful smile. Got to take her down. Saka thought with desperation, his body numbed from the force of the blow. He still tried to raise his wand to fight back. His arm shook, fear flooded his entire body and lent him strength to hold the blue crystal-tipped wand in front of his body. His lips opened to cast a spell, but before he could speak, he felt the dirty coppery taste of blood on his tongue. His brown eyes spread open in horror. Faster than he'd seen her move, her hand shoved into his mouth. The widened eyes trembled, the urge to fight was gone, all that remained was the urge to beg. He shook his head and stared into her beautiful, apple-like face. Her yellow eyes held him intently. HMPF, she said to him a moment later, less courage than the village girl. Pathetic. She didn't piss herself when she was about to die. He didn't get to ask what the mad woman was yammering about before the fingers bent and dug into his tongue, splitting the soft flesh and then tearing back out away from his mouth. That pain was bad enough, but hot on its heels was the raw agony of his teeth being knocked out from the inside. They clattered to the floor so loudly that over his mutilated cries, he could still hear their noise. The taste of blood was gone, as was his tongue and her hand. She threw it on the floor and stomped on it with a sickening squelch. If I liked you, hurting you would be a lot more fun, but as it is, you'll have to do. He held his hands over his wounded maw and shook his entire body back and forth in denial. He didn't have a moment to try to work out what she meant. She showed him first. Her hands tore at his flesh, and he let out tongueless cries as the sickening sound of his own tearing flesh reached his ears. No. No. Master. Master, help us. Saka thought with desperation. Nothing to say? Cat got your tongue? The woman giggled and crouched over him. The smell of his own blood, sweat, and fear soaked his body like a torrential rain soaked the ground. No. No, it wasn't a cat, she whispered as she came closer, her face looming close to his. It was a wolf. She allowed her face to briefly begin to morph, and despair consumed even his sense of fear. He lost consciousness, fainting straight away and going limp. Well, that was anticlimactic. Lupus Regina muttered, stood up, and stomped hard on his head. The skull cracked open and the brain within smushed as easily as mud under a heavy boot. She turned around to see Evil Eye standing at the door. Wow. Just. Wow. She tore them apart. Evil Eye could only look on, impressed at the corpses. The victim on the table was in horrible shape, burned, mutilated, stretched on the wooden rack. He could have been down with these monsters for weeks, or even months for all Evil Eye knew, and the Dark Hero's companion seemed to have taken his treatment very personally. She really wanted to avenge him. Evil Eye felt the sense of approval growing as she saw the way the last of the necromancers had been torn apart. He's still alive, you want to bring him along or just come back for him later? Lupu asked her, pointing at the man on the rack who had no strength to speak. He blinked, and that was the first real sign of life Evil Eye saw in him. We'll come back, who knows what's further down. Dead men who don't know they're dead yet, that's all, Lupu said, but under the eye of her appraiser. She cast a simple healing spell on the broken man, and left the room just as Moman passed it by.